the only thing that can allow sustainability in the future and ensure that whatever we've done so far does not go waste is if that building itself or that project itself is able to generate enough revenue for its own maintenance. I had a privilege of sitting down with the current Maharaja of Kapurthala. He's a 89-year-old gentleman with lots of properties, lots of heritage in his favor. According to him, even if he would put every last of his penny towards the maintenance of that structure that he owns without letting it open to the public, he would not even come halfway. So the care with which these buildings were made and the care that they require now on is something that you have to take into account, and it is going to cost whoever wants to do it money. So that has to be thought of from the very onset of things, because only then you're going the whole way. Otherwise, there will come a point where you have to regenerate and begin from the start. If you are not able to think of something that you're creating in the modern world from that perspective. So it is not wrong to think of monetary aspects when you're talking about restoration. In fact, it is progressive and it will 100% ensure that it is carried forward in the right intention. If you can plan for that in the initial phases, I think it goes a long, long way, and it's not a conversation we should shy away from having. So the three key concepts of any such activity are either conservation, restoration and adaptive reuse. How these terms might sound similar, they have a very thin line between all of the three and the way in which one approaches to ensure that activities are done according to ethical protocols listed within these broad spectrums. Talking about conservation, it will allow you to protect and preserve whatever you found already. So say I found a painting where an area of the painting is lost. Conservation tells me that it should be treated in such a manner, or it should be handled in such a manner that no further loss can happen to that painting. While there is already a loss, it is allowing me that knowledge that there are chances of the paint layer to be lost. Conservation tells me that I must ensure that it is consolidated. Anything that is affecting the stability of the paint layer is at rest in this stage, and it should be preserved, so it, at least in the best of your understanding, the next future course of action does not pose any immediate threats on the structural stability of those things. And of course prevent any further deterioration in other areas adjoining, say losses, it could be the environmental impact. So all of that comes within the realms of conservation. It is something which is quite little actually. When you think about the interventions that one has to take, conservation requires least amount of intervention, which makes it the best practice oftentimes, because you also spoke about minimal or reversible intervention. So when you do less, you also are able to have more control over the process of moving forward. So conservation is actually the first thing that one must do, and a lot of the times people who have been studying the subject or are focused on forming guidelines, I mean it's a very young profession, it's only come up in the last 70-80 years or so, they're constantly wanting to improve their understanding of this, and conservation allows you to do the bare minimum yet do justice to the subject itself. Restoration aims at, like the word itself, restoring the entity to its original cause. It could be like the image here. Okay, so could you guess the image in the conservation section? Anybody can identify what this structure is? Can make it easy for you. It's also in Calcutta. No, this is actually the old currency building. Yeah. So, and when you talk about restoration, this is the Mumbai Opera House back in the day. So all of those, why I've chosen this is because all of these buildings have been worked on and they stand for great examples in each of these categories. So when we talk about restoration, we want to return a building or an object to its former glory, while ensuring the functionality of things are re-established, while also ensuring all the things that we spoke about, in terms of sustainable development, adaptive reuse. Adaptive reuse comes later. The inclusivity, the accessibility, all of those things included, restore the structure to its former glory. The Mumbai Opera House was also recently refurbished in Bombay a couple of years ago. Again, a great example of corporate social responsibility and partnerships with the public-private sector. The third most important and most popular is the adaptive reuse. And I've used a map over here because literally the power of adaptive reuse is so much that something that does not mean anything to a cultural identity can somehow become of relevance just by approaching it from a conservation point of view. So as for adaptive reuse, you have to take into consideration the contemporary use of a structure so as to enable more functionality, more usability and more engagement with the public, while also following principles listed within conservation and restoration.
It's really something that has been with me for a very long time, that I want to be able to preserve a building in Calcutta. And that inspiration and that ideology came from my grandmother, who's pictured here. She has been restoring and keeping our houses in Assam alive for, at this point, 80 plus years. The houses themselves are 100 plus years old, and that's something I've just grown up with. And she really gave me that kind of inspiration to want to do it, and also the reason being our own house in Calcutta used to be one of these beautiful old houses, and she had made all of the plans to renovate it for the new generation and the new family to live in, because of course, like all the old houses, there are less rooms, less toilets. She found all of the way around, but due to family issues and family politics, they didn't listen to her and brought the house down. And when I learned about this, I was still in school, and the reason I learned about it was because I was also interested in photography, and I would walk around taking pictures of old Calcutta. It's just something that's been with me since I was a kid. So I asked her a question, and I asked my dad a question, in fact, of why are these buildings going? Like, why don't these buildings, stay on? And the reply I got was, even our house was beautiful. Like, this is nothing. You should have seen our house. I'm like, how could you do it? Like, it was just a real visceral reaction. And since then, it's just been in my bucket list that I want to restore a building in the city.
I might want to take this opportunity to answer the question you raised. I think what you should identify as, in fact, all of those who think that they are inclined towards culture are cultural entrepreneurs in this time and age. This is something that the culture itself needs. We need to start thinking about it differently. Our heritage needs as many artists, professionals, conservators, lawyers, administrative support, decision makers, entrepreneurs as it can get, solely because there is so much to protect. So I think you don't have to find an identity, you have to create one in this case.
So essentially, I came at this from a very personal point of view, but also last 10 years I've been working on rural development, sustainable development in rural India, and we've always had this vision of connecting that work with urban India, and that's kind of where the coffee shop idea was always there. And all of this was sort of in my mind in some format, and someday I'll get a place which would have a coffee shop, and like we would live upstairs and do all of these things. And a good friend of mine, in fact, Shumona, so the TAG reference is really critical to the Red Bari story, because when Red Bari was leaving the currency building, they were looking for a house to move to, and one of the directors, Shumona, is a good friend of mine. She knew about this castle in the air story of mine, and she was house hunting, and she had the opportunity to visit 18 Sadananda Road when it was open on the market. And after looking at it, I got a message, and I had just had my son. It was just 2 months, and I got a message during breakfast with all these photos from this beautiful house, which I recognized from a Telegraph article which the house had taken out in 2019, wanting to sell to someone who would buy to preserve it. So immediately I looked at it, and I looked at John, my husband, and I was like, listen, this is happening, what do you want me to do? So he was like, well, I don't know, you've been wanting to do this forever, so let's go check it out. So before I spoke to him, I also sent my dad these messages saying, can I go look at this property? And because of my son, who had just been born, we were looking to move to a new property. And I knew there was a budget for the investment.
You were based in Kolkata?
Yes. Yeah. So I mean, at this time we were living in my parents' place. So I didn't actually, there are lots of slides about what you should do before buying a building. For me, as my husband puts it, you made up your mind that day, so there was nothing going to change it. And that was kind of it, in the sense that we decided to not invest in an apartment to move with the baby. We said, forget it, let's let it be for next few years, and this would be the investment.
You stay in this house?
We don't personally stay right now, but if the business fails, we may have to. So, really speaking, this was my first real estate investment. Any kind of real investment that was going to be my responsibility. Even when I went to see it, Mr. Banerjee, Pratyush Banerjee, he was like, what do you do? Why do you want this building? And he was extremely cautious of it, because for the last 5 years he's been wanting to sell it to someone who would preserve it.
It was his house?
Yes. And he had lost, the family had already given up. They had signed a contract with the developer the day I had messaged him. So he was like, now we've made peace with it, the family's done, we've done the contract. Are you really interested? Are you sure you're going to buy it? I was like, can I please come and see it? Please give me a week to come and see it. And then I promise we'll get back to you within a week. So that's what we did. We went and saw it. These are pictures from my first visit there. And he had questions from me, and there are questions I had for him. One of the questions was, why are you selling? And really the biggest reason for a lot of family homes to be sold is the future generations not in Calcutta, or it's just been very difficult to maintain the building. Families small, and it's out of mostly of financial reasons why families have to leave these beautiful buildings. But the Banerjee family was really, really good in how they structured everything before they came to the market. They had all the documents ready, the floor plan, they had all the technical structural issues worked out. They told us what were the problems from the beginning. But just for context, these are some questions that are good to have in the back of your mind if you're ever interested in buying a building. So then, really what we had to do was a background check, any litigations, especially when there are big families owning the same building. Are all the members aligned? Is there any history of rental? Because that can be a problem. How long is the property tax paid for? I'm going into very specifics because this is what we dealt with. A lot of this for us was very easy. I was very lucky that the family had chosen to sell it to people who would preserve it. So they did a lot of this work. Everyone doesn't do that. So yeah, and then what we had to do was a structural check. We brought in some structural engineers to confirm that the building was stable, the bones were good, and we could buy it. And then of course on the financial front you kind of check on what the asking rate is, what the circle rates are. That's just sort of basic stuff. And then the very important thing before you buy a property, especially if you want to go into commercial use, is to make sure that the location is something that KMC will allow you to make it into commercial. This was something I did not know about, but luckily I had my dad guiding me, so he made sure that we asked these questions before we said yes for the acquisition. So these are just very technical things from a business point of view, and like if anyone is ever doing it, these are things to keep in mind. What really made me decide was the house, like this beautiful spiral stairway on the terrace, the long balconies, beautiful cement block floors on the 4th floor. So it was really the vibe, the light, the air, how many sort of windows they had. Just a really positive feeling in the place.
It all has cross ventilation.
Yeah. So once we decided to buy it, there were really major decisions to be made as to how to progress with it. One of the biggest questions was, do we need a conservation architect? Because my background is completely not from anything to do with architecture, like the science behind it. So that was a big question. Do we need a structural engineer? That was a big yes. Do I need a contractor? At the time, I really thought we needed a contractor, so we got a contractor. And then things like interior design, how much to spend, your budget, what are you going to do with the building. So a lot of these decisions were made after we bought the building, knowing that I wanted to keep the building as original as possible. So in my case, I decided not to have an interior designer. I decided to have a structural engineer. And then for the conservation architect, in our case, most of the people working in conservation do much bigger projects. And the structural integrity of Red Bari was 85-90% there. So nobody really wanted to take it up as a standalone project. So what we decided was to go with a structural engineer who contacted a few conservation architects and professors in the field and kind of got that bit that way. And since we didn't make any major changes, it wasn't such a huge aspect of the decision making. And so yeah, so these are just some questions that you had to make choices for. And then the biggest thing was the approach. Like Red Bari to me is not just the building. It's the community around it, it's the community we want to build within it. So as far as the approach goes for us, as far as the restoration goes, we really kept the building front and center. There were lots of fights with the contractor for wanting to do things on the building which I just said no to. They wanted to change all of these arches. So you see the first picture is an arch that we restored. And initially they just wanted to make it flat because that's the easier way to make it share the load. And these buildings, all the load goes on the arch and around the arch. So we took 3 months instead of 1 week to restore all the arches to make sure that the arch didn't get lost. From a conservation, particularly conservation point of view, I think that was the biggest thing we did. Floor was a big thing, but I didn't let the contractors touch it.
The floor is as it is.
As it
was
is,
possible.
yeah.
Did you have the red floor or British cement?
Yeah. And so even for the restoration, we added very little new stuff. All we did was try to keep the old, and then the vision was to restore it to its original space and original look and feel, which with a little bit of a fresh modern touch. And then as far as the locality goes without saying, I'm not Bengali, I'm not from that space. So that was something that we were very, very conscious of, and we wanted to make sure that we were entering into a space that people would be accepting of us, and that came with a lot of respect that goes on to what happens in the area. So even before we bought the building, we met all of the neighbors. Mr. Banerjee was very, very kind to introduce us to all of his neighbors. And the third image is of Mr. Pratyush Banerjee and his sister, Mrs. Fridays Banerjee. On our opening day, we did a small puja with just the neighborhood and our family and them as a small sort of opening. And
Is that Mr. Banerjee?
yeah.
What is he doing?
I can answer that a little bit later. So again, even with the neighborhood, it was also about talking to the local police there, the local parking walas. It's really about establishing your community support by developing relationships, and that was kind of what we focused on doing even before the work started. Because at the end of the day, it's their locality, and you don't want to be an outsider coming and just sort of changing the way it looks and changing what's going on over there. So overall, I think the neighborhood has been really supportive of this, and I'm really thankful to have great neighbors who appreciate the work and the Red Bari and have really given us a lot of support. And then as far as why we did what on each floor, we wanted to really bring a global experience to the authentic local surrounding of Calcutta. And my personal experience has been mostly in America for the not last now, but I was gone between 2006 to 2010, and then I was gone again between 2013 and 2015. I've grown up in Calcutta, but bringing in elements of what I saw in the States, how things are done, and then my husband is American, so that is kind of an automatic influence. We really try to create something which Calcutta wants without losing the sensibility of what Calcutta is. So that's how we kind of approached the coffee shop, and co-work is becoming a big thing, so we thought that would be a nice thing to do. And really I was very conscious of what the building allowed. The very first idea we had was to make it a boutique hotel. But after looking at it, and where the bathrooms were and how the structure was, we immediately said, no, that's not going to work. One, it makes it too exclusive, and people won't be able to come enjoy it unless they're like paying guests. And two, we would have to change the structure around way too much to make that work. So we re-adapted how we were thinking of the business to have the co-work and the event floor kind of happen. And we purposely kept the event floor very flexible to allow the market to define its use and our customers to define the use and create a community out of that. And then lastly, for the financial aspects, we definitely keep that in mind. It's extremely important because, like I mentioned, this is not family funded. We don't have the funds to just keep pouring into it. It is very much a business decision to keep the building alive and hope that the building will pay for itself. So that is something we keep in mind, and another reason why we layered the building the way it is. So it's not depending on the tourist or the festive season only. It's the coffee shop has a tendency to do better in the winters. Surprisingly, we've done okay in the summer as well, but it's definitely up and down. So we did the co-work thinking the local community will use it more during the summer and throughout the year to have a stable income from that. And then the events again was more for festive seasons, wedding season, all of that. And then the B&Bs also done. So we really try to connect all the floors to feed into each other, and for the coffee shop to be the real base to support all of the other three. And so far it's been a good decision, and I really hope that more people will enjoy it. So these are the three only main structural changes that we made to make the building future-proof and also commercially safe. The first one is the lift shaft. We added a lift from the ground floor till the second floor.
Was that a courtyard?
Yes. So when we bought the building, the courtyard was pretty non-existent. It was basically a water reservoir, but it was above ground, and there wasn't any space to walk around. So we took the decision, and it was very much with the help of the structural engineers, to put the water reservoir underground, and we created the courtyard space. That was the major big thing. The lift addition was a big thing, and then we added the fire escape for the entire building, which is the last picture. It's a little bit far away, but if you could point. This is the fire escape. So
At the back side of the house?
yeah, that's the very end. We were very lucky that there was space behind us to be able to do it. And every one of these decisions had to be thought through to make sure that the house wasn't getting affected. And that's something that as an owner you have to be involved, and you cannot depend on any professional to give you better advice, because at least when you're looking at a heritage building or a old building, because people want to take the shortest route possible or the cheapest way possible, or something that is just don't think about how it will affect the other aspects. So one of the biggest things in this was to make sure that I was making these decisions for the building and not just for the people who were actually making it.